Grüß, willkommen in einem another video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 50 of my figure gaming hobby series of videos. In this case I'll be discussing using cardboard elements in a figure game. This video kind of represents my Christmas or Hanukkah special for this year. A common comment that I get from some of the viewers on my video and even the forums is how hard it was trying out a new set of rules without figures. When a player is thinking about how to get into the hobby, it helps a lot if they have already determined what set of rules they'll use. This will allow them to select the correct figure type and base them correctly. Unfortunately, if you do not have a set of rules you can try and build up a force mix based on them, then you have a bit of a problem. One option is that you can create a force mix and base them in a manner which covers as many rules as possible. But if you get it wrong, then life will be very difficult. Even if you get it right, the figure mix will certainly be wrong and there'll be an enormous amount of wastage. A good example is baggage and agents. If playing DBMM, you need baggage elements, which is not as common for most other set of rules. Even if you are an experienced player, which constantly uses an existing set of figures and an existing set of rules, if you want to try something different which requires new figures, you may be uncertain if this will be successful. The classic example is the 15mm Napoleonic player trying out 6mm Napoleonics or even 3mm Napoleonics. Using the same rules and basing as you would 15mm figures in this case may not make much sense, as why bother if you already have a functional 15mm force mix? If you're going to go 6mm or 3mm, you're probably looking at a completely different basing system, and if you go down that path you may be expending a lot of effort to base your new army and discover that it just simply doesn't work. Thus we have the perennial issue of how can we experiment with new rules, basing and scales, without wasting a lot of time and money if it doesn't work out. The answer could be using cardboard elements, or instead of figures on a base, you use a pseudo board game counter to represent the element or elements. Bitchute does this in reverse. Bitchute is a set of rules which is really designed to use playing card sized cardboard counters. Players can swap the cards out for actual figures, but this is not the normal state of the rules. The same applies to Lost Battles, which is a board game which can swap out the cardboard counters for actual figures as well. In this video I'll do the reverse, which is to take an existing figure gaming set of rules and swap out the figures for cardboard counters. What I find rather odd, in this example video I'm using a set of rules which I call P17CW, which is a figure gaming version of the SPI Pre-Stags board game. So if players want, they can simply play a board game rather than try and make a pseudo figure game. However, as the objective is to try out a set of rules without buying the figures, we need to simulate the figure game experience as much as possible. This technique can be used for any figure gaming set of rules, although the rules you are using may change the way you have to construct or use the cardboard figures. So, take that as a caveat. The rules I'm using P17CW only because it's a simple set of rules, but this could apply to any set of rules. While you can simply duplicate actual figure-based elements with cardboard elements, and there's a wide range of cardboard things you can cut out and create on elements if you wish, one benefit of using cardboard is you can stack elements. Thus, you may consider going down the board game path, which is what I'm doing in this video. Thus, instead of having 2 rows of infantry, you can have 2 cardboard elements stacked on each other. This allows you to have larger and easier to use cardboard elements. Moving around 4cm wide, 1.5cm deep cardboard pieces can be fiddly, while standardising on a single size, such as a 4cm square or 4cm wide and 3cm deep, or even a 3cm square, which I'm using in this video, can make playing a game easier. It also reduces the counter curve effect, which I'll talk about in a moment. The rules I'll be using in this example is P17CW rules, which stands for Pre-17th Century Warfare Rules. However, this version of those rules uses the DBMM army lists and element types, so players of those rules can use the counters if they so desire, and they will find this familiar and potentially useful. The example game or period will be using a DBMM 200-point New Kingdom Egyptian 1543 BC to 1069 BC, which is in the Book 1, Army List 22, against a Hittite Empire 1380 BC to 1170 BC army, which is book 1 again, army list 24. In order to give me more real estate, I'm using an element width of 3 centimetres. Players can use a traditional 4 centimetre base width, but 3 centimetre width is what I use for 6 mil, which is why I went down that path. My personal objective is to determine if I should purchase a 6 mil New Kingdom Egyptian and Hittite Empire force mix. I base my 6 mil on 3 centimetre wide bases, so I see little point in basing my 6 mil on the same basis as 15 mil figures, because I currently have 15 mil figures. I wanted to try something new, which is really what caused me to create this video in the first place. I created my board game elements using PowerPoint or OpenOffice or LibreOffice or whatever you wish to use, and print the result on thick paper, normally 200 GSM, using an inkjet printer. I've got quite an old inkjet printer, so most people should at least have that. I then glue this printed sheet or thick piece of paper onto a piece of 1.75mm thick cardboard. 2mm would be better, but it's simply too difficult to cut. Although if players have a guillotine which can handle such thick cardboard, then I would suggest that is your best option. This image here shows my 2 cardboard element sheets glued to a piece of thick cardboard. I will normally allow this to dry for at least 24 hours. I also typically use an outdoor wood PVA glue simply because it's a much thicker consistency, thus it does a better job spreading, and it doesn't soak through the paper so much. However, another probably better option is spray glue, although this normally doesn't glue as thoroughly as, let's say, a outdoor wood PVA glue. If you do not use thick paper, the ink may run as the glue soaks through the paper, which is one reason why I use an outdoor PVA glue. 200 GSM prevents this. If you use spray glue, then don't worry about this. It's not an issue, and you can use normal 80 GSM paper to print your counter sheets before gluing onto or spray gluing onto your cardboard. What we see here is the edge of my cardboard sheet. In this case, it's a 1.75mm thick cardboard. Because I'm using 200 GSM paper on both sides, it gets pretty close to a 2mm thick piece of cardboard. One advantage of having thick cardboard, or actually the only real advantage of having thick cardboard counters, is they're easier to pick up. If you ever try and pick up counters which are very thin, you'll see what I mean. They're almost impossible to pick up, but 1.75 with 200 GSM pieces of paper, no problems at all. This incidentally shows the rear of my cardboard sheet and gives you an idea of the type of cardboard I use. Before you glue the rear sheet onto the piece of cardboard, you now need to cut the counters out using very large dressmaker scissors. It's important you do this to ensure the rear or the edges align with each other, or the front of each counter aligns with the rear of each counter. I'll show you what I mean in a moment. This shows the sheet fully cut out. It's very important to ensure the piece of paper that you glue to the rear does align, and by cutting it out in this way, it becomes a lot easier to do so. Now you print out the other side of your counter, as you can see on the right there, which is the symbol for Egypt, and you need to cut these counters out along the edge in exactly the same way. And the reason you do this is that when you glue it to the cardboard, you can actually ensure, if you align the edges perfectly, you know that the front and rear will be aligned correctly on each counter. What we see here is the cardboard turned over, and you'll notice that your sheet, that is the sheet you're going to be gluing on, if you put it on top of the cardboard, it should align perfectly along all the edges. You know, there'll always be some small movement here and there, but it should generally fit perfectly on top of your cardboard. Now we spread glue onto the rear of the cardboard and make this as even as possible. You need to ensure that every bit of that cardboard has at least some glue to make sure that when you cut your counters out, the bits of cardboard don't fall off your counter. I've now glued the sheet, and you can see the edge here is perfectly aligned with the edge of the cardboard. You need to check all the edges. Well, you need to at least check two edges. It's assumed that as long as you've cut things out correctly, the other two will automatically be aligned, but make sure that that's a nice smooth alignment, as you can see here. You then place the glued sheets and cardboard on a plastic surface. As you do not wish any excess glue gluing the sheet to the surface of whatever you're putting on, if you ensure that the surface is plastic, PVA glue doesn't glue to plastic. You then place a similar plastic covered surface on the cardboard to ensure it's pressed flat. These books that you see here have been covered by a stick-on plastic surface. Contact is the brand name, but there's many other different varieties, but it's got to be plastic. If you don't have Contact, then sheets of plastic with books on top of it. But make sure that whatever you place on top of that cardboard will not glue the cardboard piece to itself. As I'm creating two counter sheets, I place the next fully glued on counter sheet on top of the book that I've previously placed down, as you can see here. I then place another suitably Contact or plastic covered book on top of that second glue counter sheet, and then I will typically place a weight on top of this. This will take 24 hours to dry. It's pretty important to make sure that the cardboard is really pressed as flat as possible to make sure the glue glues every little bit of the paper onto the cardboard. After allowing to dry for 24 hours, the rear has now sufficiently dried to make sure that it will not peel or anything like that. However, it'll still be slightly wet and soft. It's important you now cut the counters out while the cardboard is reasonably soft in order to make it easier to cut. If the cardboard is thinner or if you have a guillotine, that's not a major issue and you can allow it to fully dry accordingly. These are the cut out counters, and you can quickly see why it's critical to line up the rear sheet. You can see the rear of each counter is correctly placed in this image. Once all the counters are cut out, which can be a major effort, and I would advise you to do no more than 2 counter sheets in a session, otherwise you're going to get RSI of your hand, you have your cardboard elements, as you can see here. One issue you may have with the cardboard elements is that they may be slightly warped. Before the glue dries, you may wish to stack the counters 4 deep and place a book and weight on top to fully flatten the counters. It's not essential, but as you'll be stacking counters in the example game, it may be, may look better. It's more critical, or this is far more critical if you're duplicating figure element accuracy, as if you, let's say you decided to create a cardboard element which is 4 cm long by 1.5 cm deep. In that case, the counters will absolutely warp and it'll be quite noticeable, which is one reason why I try and stay with a square counter, in this case a 3 cm square. If I was trying to duplicate the 4 cm element width, I'd probably go for a 4 cm square element and just allow stacking to simulate the effect of elements sitting behind each other. We have now created our cardboard counters. Let's see what it looks like in an actual game. In this case, the Hittites move first and leave their camp, which is the 2 counters in the rear. These are baggage counters with fortifications on them, and their loss could have an impact on the morale of your army. These rules use baggage simply because the army lists are all pure DBMM army lists, and they need to be included to be true to those army lists. Regardless, the P17CW or SPI pre-stag sets of rules does allow for their use, so why not? The advancing army is in the front and it's attempting to take the objective point in the centre of the playing area, forcing the Egyptians to attack. This just happens to be a way that I use to force combat. It's assumed both sides have decided they're going to fight a battle. One's not going to run away from the other or anything like that, in which case we're not really talking about a battle. They've both decided they're going to fight a battle, and as a result, in order to force this, there is a central spot in the playing area, which if you hold at the end of the game means you gain a lot of victory points. This ends the Hittite game turn 1. On the other player edge, the Egyptian army leaves its camp, driving for the centre of the playing area. It'll not get to the objective first, so we'll need to force the Hittites to adopt a poor formation or position, while forming up in a better formation in order to attack. This is the advantage of attacking first, and once again, it actually comes from DBMM, the whole concept of the invading army gets to defend for, which seems a little bit odd, but it does make sense, while the defending army has to attack. In order so you can see how the two forces look in relation to each other, this shows the position of both forces. I must admit this playing area is much too green for a Hittite-Egyptian playing area, and it's filled with too many rivers for a typical Egyptian conflict, and I should have used probably a different playing area, but I wanted to see how this plays. The chariots will have a very hard time in this game. Incidentally, in these rules, because of the scale, include the pre-battle manoeuvring, which is a little bit unusual for other rules. If you were playing DBMM, basically both armies would start the game in a pretty much fully deployed state. In this case, both players will be moving their army to deployment and deploying accordingly. Now we come to game turn 2. Both players move again and both armies are getting closer to engagement distance. If the Hittites try and take the centre point, marked with a very light grey dot, they will be exposed to an Egyptian attack. What is worse is the slower Hittite spearmen are trailing behind. Incidentally, one of the optional rules that I do use with this is that when the two forces are sufficiently distant from each other, you flip all the counters. So the opposing player doesn't really know what the counters represent until they get within missile range or movement range, or alternatively something moves in a way that makes it obvious what type of troop type it is. So, for example, if the Egyptian chariots decide to expend their entire movement allowance and they're flipped over, then they can only be chariots. This video is not going to be an analysis of any of the rules, so I'm not going to really go into any rules mechanics details, but the comments that I'll be providing would apply to any set of rules you use, or even a historical analysis of the battles. Now, in this case, the Hittite main advantage is their heavy chariots, which the Egyptians simply cannot match. The Egyptians have a manoeuvrability advantage, which would be significant in an open desert environment, but in this case, the Egyptians cannot use their superior manoeuvrability to gang up on the Hittite chariots because of terrain. On the other hand, the Egyptians have more foot and can form a longer line, which would force the Hittites to attack the Egyptian foot. The Egyptians possess better missile fire, which could severely affect the Hittite chariots if they had a chance to use it. The other Hittite trump card is their fast pikemen. At least that's what they are in the DBMM army list. This gives them a very powerful infantry shot force, which could be negatively affected by enemy missile fire, but as long as the leader is with the Hittite foot, that will not be a major issue. Unless, of course, the result is the leader gets wounded. Of course, the Hittite foot are slow, which is their main issue. Fast for pike, just note, but slow compared with the bulk of the troop types involved in this battle. If you're interested to see what these stacks of cardboards would look like if using figures, this is an example. 3 cm wide elements is suitable for 6mm figures. In this case, there is a unit which composes of 3 elements that you can see in the centre. This is the same as the 3 Syrian spearmen counters stacked on top of each other to the left. Now we come to game turn 3. The Hittites now need to form up for battle. Due to the lack of room, the best tactic is to use the heavy chariots to attempt to punch their way through. If this fails, the Hittite right flank has a very powerful Hittite spearman force, which should be able to complete the job if the chariots fail. The Egyptians line up for their defence with a line of spearmen supported by bowmen. The chariots are covering the right flank and with the other chariot force on the opposing flank. The Egyptians have taken advantage of the hill and if given enough time will also move into the woods. This is something the Hittites cannot allow the Egyptians to do. The Hittites, in order to not give the Egyptians enough time to really create a very good defence, they decide to charge in with the chariots. The Egyptians will unleash their bowmen, hoping to disorder at least one chariot. However, the Hittite chariots will be very difficult to defeat. The Egyptian defence is 5 per stack. That is 2 spearmen, which is 2 defence each, and 1 bowman, which is 1 defence. Although the stacks with general will be a lot harder to take on. Basically, the generals add a combat bonus, which does not exceed the normal defence of the stack they're with. The Hittites' attack is 8, that is, each chariot is 8. So by focusing 2 chariots on an Egyptian stack, they will at least get 2 3-to-1 attacks, which is a good attack profile. It's likely that 2 stacks will become disordered as a result, but when the Egyptians counterattack, they will have a slight advantage, as the heavy chariots do not defend as well as they attack, although they still defend reasonably well. Personally, I suspect the Hittites will probably win this. While they have less forces, their forces are simply better in melee. The Egyptian light chariots will start sniping, as the chariots can run in, unleash missiles and run away, but the terrain does not favour that type of attack. And I think this is going to be the biggest problem the Egyptians will have, is the terrain. For myself, the cardboard counters, or I'm using these cardboard counters in order to test the validity of getting a 6mm ancient force mix, specifically a 200-point Egyptian and Hittite force. I like the idea of chariots and now think they're rather cool. I do have to admit, if using, I'm uncertain if using cardboard counters on a more long-term basis will work. Most of my previous attempts at doing something similar have failed, but in those attempts I created a full board game, including the playing area for testing processes. In this case, I'm using the figure game terrain with full-size counters, and I must admit it does give me a better feel than a board game, for example. It does not compare with actual figures, but may be viable for someone learning how to play a set of rules. In conclusion, creating cardboard elements serves a purpose when a player wants to test a new scale, army, or set of rules. It also makes sense for new players who are uncertain what scale, army, or rules they wish to adopt. This hobby is not cheap, and it does take a lot of effort to create an army. This method allows you to basically test out if your idea works, and only once you're absolutely certain that this is what you want to do, you can go in and do it and expend your effort. And if it doesn't work out, then you don't. And so we come to an end of part 50 of my 2022 Christmas special video of my figure gaming hobby series of videos, in this case covering the use of cardboard elements in a figure game. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.